This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. Ebola fear is gripping the nation, and veteran diplomat Robert Hormats says the disease is just one of a number of new foreign policy challenges for the United States. Demographer and political analyst Ruy Teixeira says there's a chance Democrats can retain the Senate, and that 2016 looks even better. And Bill Press talks with Danny Cantor of the Democratic Governors Association about the election outlook in the statehouses. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Longtime diplomat Robert Hormats assesses the foreign policy challenges facing America, and he says Ebola is one of them. And joining us now on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Robert Hormats was Undersecretary of State for Economic Growth, Energy, and the Environment under Hillary Clinton. He is currently vice chairman of the consulting firm Kissinger Associates. Ambassador Hormats, thanks very much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thank you for having me on your show.
Absolutely. Great to have you. Although this is something that could probably take a long, long time, many hours, can you, if you would please, briefly run down the top foreign policy challenges facing America right now? ISIL, Iran, Israel, Russia. Where are we there? What's the priority?
Well, we have a lot of foreign policy challenges. I think ISIL is a major challenge because it creates enormous instability and is a brutal force in various parts of the Middle East, particularly Iraq and Syria. But there are other extremist groups that are operating that are also very dangerous. There are extremist groups operating in Libya, in various parts of North Africa, in various parts of West Africa, northern Nigeria, and Central African Republic, and Mali, very extreme groups. There's Boko Haram, a very dangerous group in the region. And what is challenging about this is that these operate in places where governments really have lost control, or pockets of countries where there is no effective governance, and they prey on people who are alienated from their societies or their governments. So dealing with them is not just a military issue, although I think the military role can be useful, but it requires, in addition to any military roles that are played by us or other countries, trying to figure out ways of supporting governments in those regions to deal with these people themselves, either through their military or by establishing a stronger political structure so that these people will not succeed, these radical groups will not succeed in gaining the allegiance of people in the region. The second, obviously, is the Russian activity in Ukraine, the takeover of Crimea, Russian forces operating in eastern Ukraine. This is very dangerous, and it's dangerous because we had thought after the Cold War that the borders of Europe were pretty well established. Now we find that they are very vulnerable, and once this continuation proceeds, or if it proceeds, then I think you have to be very supportive of other countries in the region to make sure that it does not spread. And that means working through NATO with other countries who are NATO members. It also means, I think, trying to strengthen economic ties with Western Europe so that they are able to become more prosperous in the sense of being able to overcome some of their current economic difficulties. But to the extent we trade with Europe, it enhances jobs in Europe and the United States, and we need a stronger structure to do this. And the administration is working on one now called the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. And third, we need a lot more cooperation on energy. Energy is a source of vulnerability to Western Europe, and the Russians use this as a way of dividing countries in Western Europe from one another and dividing Europe from the United States. And I think one of Russia's goals today is not just a weak and divided Ukraine, it's a weak and divided European Union or Western Europe, because a weak and divided Western Europe will be less able to support Ukraine or other parts of the region that could be vulnerable. So we need to find ways, particularly in the energy area, to reduce the potential that energy can be used by the Russians as a source to divide countries of the region, as a divisive lever that pries one part of Europe from another. That would be very harmful. And in addition to that, energy cooperation between the United States and Europe can be very helpful in increasing jobs here and in Europe, and that can be beneficial because Europe is still our biggest trading partner. So to the extent the European economies recover, to the extent they're less vulnerable to leverage by the Russians utilizing oil and gas, we also benefit because it helps jobs in the United States. A third area that is very important now and will be for decades to come is to have a good relationship with China. China is the rising economic, political, and military power in Asia and in other parts of the world, but particularly in Asia. And I think that we need to figure out, and I think we're working on that very effectively, figure out a relationship whereby the United States and China work together both to strengthen bilateral cooperation and to strengthen the global economy and ensure a greater degree of security in the region of the Pacific and other parts of the world. So those would be three very important areas. And I would add one or two more. One is the environment. We still need to continue to build cooperation to deal with environmental issues, because over a period of time, they're going to be a major threat, not just to the environment in general, but a lot of countries depend on the environment. If the oceans rise, a lot of areas will suffer vulnerability, low-lying parts of the world, from Bangladesh to Vietnam to parts of the United States to other parts of the world. And obviously it will have enormous implications for everyone, because the weather changes and the volatility of weather is going to be more and more affected by climate change. So the climate issue is in the medium and the longer term, but even today, not just a climate issue that is limited to climate, but it also has major national security implications. And the water issue is related to that, because water, for many people, is much more of a vulnerability than lack of oil or lack of energy. So that would be one. A second one would be to deal with the potential for global pandemics. We've seen the Ebola virus spread around the world. There's a lot of need for greater cooperation, not just in dealing with Ebola, but other potential pandemics that could affect the United States and many parts of the world. And the third is the cyber issue, which is becoming more and more of a foreign policy and national security and economic problem. And we're going to need to figure out ways in which we can work with other countries to address the issue of cybersecurity, the broader issues of privacy. These are all major foreign policy issues, some more acute than others, but all of them require a lot of focus by the White House, the State Department, and other agencies of the federal government and
Certainly.
other countries.
Yeah. We're speaking with Robert Hormats, vice chairman of the consulting firm Kissinger Associates. How did you as a diplomat deal with the need for U.S. commercial growth in countries that had terrible human rights records?
Well, that's a big problem. And we have policies where we simply didn't deal with countries with major humanitarian issues that have very poor human rights record. From an economic point of view, they didn't get Export-Import Bank financing. They didn't get foreign assistance. They were not able to get money from the Millennium Challenge Corporation, which provides economic support for various countries that perform well from an economic and societal point of view. So we obviously need to stand for a strong human rights policy around the world. This is very important because this is who we are as Americans. We believe in human rights. We believe that there should be opportunities for people to prosper economically. We believe that there should be policies that ensure rights for women, that children should be able to go to school. Young men and young women, children, both male and female, should have the right to attend school in Afghanistan and many other parts of the world without being killed or harassed by various groups which don't believe in that. We believe that governments should treat their people with a high standards of decency and respect, and that there should be freedom of religion. People should be able to practice religion. There should be no gender discrimination. We believe in all those things. Now, are we able to get every country in the world to agree to the standards that we believe in? Almost certainly, we're not going to be able to do that right away, if at all. But we need to push that very hard. And we need to have certain boundaries to our policy in the sense that if countries really perform badly on human rights, then we minimize our economic relations with them. In some cases, we impose sanctions on them, which we have done in the past, and we don't give them foreign assistance. So there are ways in which the United States can use its leverage. We also have lists of people who are major human rights violators who are not entitled to visas to visit the United States. There are various ways in which we can do this, but it is a very important tenet of American foreign policy. And in some cases, there are trade embargoes on such countries where we don't remember, for instance, Burma, because of its poor human rights policy, which has changed dramatically over the last few years. But before that, there were major trade and economic embargoes on Burma. So we do have limits to the kinds of interaction we will have with countries that have poor human rights performance.
What about free trade? Is that always the best policy, even when it might harm certain business and labor constituencies at home?
Well, I'm a believer that trade can be highly beneficial to the United States if it's conducted on the basis of fair rules which are well implemented. I think the United States is far better off by being an active trading participant in the world economy. A lot of American jobs today would not exist if it weren't for the opportunity for Americans to sell their services and goods and farm products abroad. We should not forget that between 5 and 10 million jobs in our own country are supported by exports to various parts of the world. Now, it is also true that imports create competition, and to a degree, in some sectors, that competition can undermine jobs or weaken wage bargaining in certain sectors of the United States. And that's a fact, too. It's also true that trade around the world in some sectors is not really free because governments provide a lot of support to their companies through subsidies and other things to make their companies artificially competitive with our own companies, and that's harmful to our companies, it's harmful to jobs. So we want to be able to increase opportunities for sales of American goods around the world because that creates jobs at home. But we also want to make sure there's a level playing field so that other countries operate on the basis of fair rules so that their goods do not achieve artificial competitive advantage, which gives them an unfair advantage over American goods, which does cost us jobs. And we also want to make sure that when we negotiate agreements, other countries adhere to those agreements. For instance, in the World Trade Organization, if a country is not adhering to its commitments to the World Trade Organization, if there's dumping or subsidy or other unfair trade practices, there are provisions to utilize the WTO to get those countries to change their policies. We also have laws at home to deal with dumping, to deal with subsidies, to deal with other practices, and we have the ability to implement those laws to restrict foreign goods that are made abroad where the countries do not adhere to correct policies that are internationally agreed regarding dumping or subsidies or other unfair trade practices. So we need to be very supportive of exports, but we also need to be sure that the rules of the system are adhered to, and we have domestic laws and we have international systems, particularly under the WTO, to counter that. So if you say to me, is free trade a good idea? We don't really have perfect free trade, but we do have a much more open trading system than before. If we take advantage of the opportunity, it can create a lot of jobs at home, but at the same time, we have to be very firm about making sure that other countries play by the rules, because if they don't, it's harmful to the system, and it's certainly very harmful to American workers and the American economy.
Absolutely. Now, before we let you go, I'm going to change directions on you a little bit. You spent 25 years at Goldman Sachs. Why didn't you or anyone else in the firm see the crash of 2008 coming?
I think most people, including people in the federal government, including the Federal Reserve, didn't see the crash coming. Many times in history, and I was a student of Charles Kindleberger, who wrote a book on this, and he documented many of the crises, the crashes that have occurred really over the course of history. And in most cases, very few people saw them coming. So it's certainly true we did not see the crash of 2007, 2008 occurring. You have to learn from experience, but crashes are really, unfortunately, part of the way financial systems work. There are periods where things are very good, and then there are periods where there's a crash. And I think that one of the things that has always struck me is that periods of stability lead to complacency. And when you add stability and complacency, problems can build up, which people don't recognize because they're so confident that things are going well that they miss signals that ultimately build the basis for a future crash down the road. So if we're too complacent, if things go for too well for too long, then a lot of complacency builds up, and we're not as vigilant about the kinds of forces that are working beneath the surface that can cause these kinds of crashes in the future. So we have to be a lot more vigilant about this and identify potential problems that could lead to a crash far in advance and do something about it.
Well, do you think the complaints of Occupy Wall Street and even the Tea Party about the power of Wall Street have any merit?
I think those are very excessive and in some cases don't really reflect an understanding of the nature of the problems that they purport to be attempting to address. I do think there are some issues that need to be addressed, and that is we have a financial system that is the strongest in the world in good times, but can also be very disruptive to ourselves and to the world in bad times. The crisis that we're just talking about, the post-Lehman Brothers crisis, disrupted the United States economy and disrupted the world economy. One of the things that I think is very important, and I've believed for some time, and that is that it's extremely important for Wall Street and for the financial community in general, not just Wall Street, but the financial community in general to understand what the implications of its actions are on small and medium-sized business and the average American. For instance, Wall Street has recovered quite well from the crisis, but a lot of small and medium-sized businesses are still finding it very difficult to obtain financing. And as you well know, job growth in this country depends very heavily on small and medium-sized enterprises. So one of the things that's very important is to make sure our financial system works and to make sure it works for the average American, for small and medium-sized enterprise, for people who need to get money to start a small store in Main Street, Des Moines, Iowa. When I was in government, I made a point, because my responsibility was international economic policy, I made a point of going to various parts of the country that were not doing well. I went to Gary, Indiana, Hammond, Indiana, Hamtramck, Michigan, New Orleans, numerous other cities and towns. And it was very interesting because many of them, first of all, a lot of them really felt that they could benefit from exporting because they saw the economy was weak at home. They looked for opportunities abroad, and they wanted the government to help them do this, which the government has ways of doing. But the other thing that was very troubling to me is that they were concerned that while the major financial entities in this country, the financial system in broad terms had done better and was doing better, that they were still not getting the benefits. So I think to keep a strong society and a strong economy, one of the things that's very important is to demonstrate to Americans that when the financial system recovers, that there be a lot more focus on supporting opportunities for small and medium-sized enterprises to get financing, because that's where you're going to get the revitalization of Main Street America. If Main Street America, if hardworking Americans don't feel that the financial system is working for them, that it's working for some but not for many others, that undermines support for our democracy, for our society. It weakens our society. And therefore, one of my goals, and I've said this publicly on numerous occasions, is to be sure that we have a well-functioning financial system, which we need because it's the lifeblood of our economy. But a well-functioning financial system should be inclusive and should ensure that the financial system functions for a lot of people who, at this point, don't feel that even though Wall Street and the big banks have done well, that they've done well. And it's very important for there to be a partnership in this country between the large financial institutions and those entities, cities, states, small business, medium-sized businesses that need financing and need to be able to get money in order to both survive and to be able to hire new people. The barber down the street, the small shopkeeper in middle America, these people need to be sure the financial system is working for them. And if it doesn't, it's very corrosive of our democratic system and undermines in the long run the prosperity of this country on which all of us depend.
Okay. Robert Hormats, former Undersecretary of State for Economic Growth, Energy, and the Environment, currently Vice Chairman of the consulting firm Kissinger Associates, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much for your time today. We look forward to doing it again with you soon.
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Absolutely. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. How do Democrats rebuild their base? Demographer Ruy Teixeira says concentrate on millennials. We'll talk to him about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
Gosh, time flies when it's pushed along by a jet stream of greed. It seems like only yesterday that Walmart executives announced with self-congratulatory fanfare that the super-rich retailing colossus was not a Scrooge after all. Indeed, while the world's largest purveyor of stuff was not about to raise its poverty-level wages, it benevolently decided to provide a bare-bones health insurance plan to its 600,000 part-time employees, who make up nearly half of its total workforce. But quicker than you can spell avaricious, the $476 billion a year giant has now decided to renege, saying that as of January 1st, it will terminate coverage for employees who work less than 30 hours a week. Why that particular cutoff? Because also beginning next January 1st, people working less hours than that can apply for subsidized coverage from the public insurance exchanges created by our country's new Affordable Care Act. Yes, this means that super-wealthy Walmart is piling the cost of its health care obligations onto the backs of its low-wage workers who might, or might not, be able to get a bit of a subsidy from us taxpayers. Walmart's slick honchos are effectively stealing a benefit meant to help low-income families, perverting it into a benefit for their own profiteering. But don't think they're Dickensian Scrooges coldly abandoning their employees. No, they say they're engaging a, quote, health coverage specialist to guide workers through the process of finding an insurance alternative. Of course, that will be the one financed by you and me. This is Jim Hightower saying, once again, the Waltons, the exploitative multi-billionaire heirs to the Walmart fortune, get the gold mine, while workers and taxpayers get the shaft. As the head of the Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union said of this latest ripoff, it's shameful. But shameful is a core corporate value at Walmart.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Political analyst Ruy Teixeira predicts Republicans will keep the House, the Democrats might retain the Senate, but that 2016 looks good for the White House and Senate.
And we say hello to Ruy Teixeira, senior fellow at both the Century Foundation and the Center for American Progress, co-author with John Halpin of an article in Washington Monthly on how to shape an economic message that appeals to the white working class. Ruy Teixeira, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Very happy to be here.
And we're happy to have you with us as well. Let's talk about a subject of your expertise, the white voter, the Reagan Democrat, the cultural conservative who was once reliably Democrat. How do we get them back?
Well, I think there are 2 parts to that answer. One would be that if you have any hope of getting the actual classical Reagan Democrats back, certainly it lies along the lines of an economic approach that you might call middle-out economics or everyone economics. But basically, we know that from looking at the polling data that these voters they're suspicious of government, but it's a lot because they think government isn't on their side. It's on the side of the rich. And government just doesn't effectively serve their interests, and the whole system in general these days is functioning so that it benefits the so-called 1%, and it doesn't really benefit the average middle-class person. So you need to take direct aim at that perception and, sort of incorporate that into your narrative, as it were, and also offer, programs, ideas that sound like to those voters that they might actually benefit them in terms of creating jobs and making it easier for them to get ahead. And, there's lots of different ideas along those lines. But the second part of it is that you can't, probably the white working class voters, Democrats that are most interested in reaching and have the best opportunity to reach, are not the part of that group you might call Reagan Democrats, because those are pretty much older white working class voters at this point. You have a much better target of opportunity in the younger cohorts, especially the millennials, who are part of the white working class today. These voters are actually not particularly conservative socially. They're not particularly anti-government. In fact, one interesting thing is if you look at the data, you compare white college-educated voters of older generations and white working class voters of older generation, you can see this very distinct anti-government slant, a class difference, where the white working class voters, these are your kind of Reagan Democrats, are just, very, very angry at government and suspicious of it. But you look at the younger group and you compare the working class with the college-educated whites, and they're actually like pretty similar to each other. There isn't that much of a class difference, and compared to older cohorts, they're much more sympathetic to the role of government and much less cynical about it. That doesn't mean they love it, but they're less hostile, and that's important because, if you can't get your foot in the door, you can't talk to people, and with the younger group, you're clearly more able to get your foot in the door. So that's the other factor, that we need to look at the white working class as a broad group, which varies by class, it varies by generation, it varies by region, and there's some parts of it that are much more susceptible to what you might call progressive messages than others.
So that suggests that at least part of it, the white working class, could be moving to the left over time. Mm-hmm. But which issues should progressives be pushing in order to win back a majority of them, or even just a greater number? Because obviously that's something that's been difficult.
Well, again, I think you're really looking at economic issues that these voters would view as putting government on their side, and be that, for example, putting more money into or more support into education so that everybody can get, the sort of training and education they need and would actually be able to afford it. That would be something that makes sense given the way the economy is evolving and given everything we know about the different economic outcomes from the college-educated and non-college-educated, and given everything we know about the increasing difficulty of being able to take advantage of that opportunity and make your way through. That's just one example. There are others. We know infrastructure spending is extremely popular. We know these are good jobs for, both college-educated and non-college-educated. We know it would help the economy on net, and it's something the country clearly needs, and it would help get us closer to full employment, which in and of itself is something that's of huge benefit to the kinds of voters that the Democrats want to reach. Obviously they're talking a lot about raising the minimum wage these days, enormously popular with everybody, including these voters. So I think there's a variety of things, but they all have to do with things that will make the economy grow faster and work better for the sort of median voter, including these white working class folks. So I think there's now. How do you get those things through Congress?
That was my was my next question for you. Okay,
the only way to do that. I don't want to be too partisan about that, but realistically, the way the country is currently constructed, the more Democrats you have in office, the better. It helps if the Senate is Democratic. It helps if you get the House out of Republican hands, which is some structural difficulties for it. And obviously, you need a Democratic president, and you need a Democratic Party that's pretty much oriented around these kinds of issues and makes them central. It's good to see that at this point there's relatively little talk about how, the country's rising debt is going to result in mortgaging or, sort of having our grandchildren have to pick up the bill, blah, blah, blah. The whole analysis that was
Sure.
actually quite popular among Democrats when they got the pants scared off of them from the 2010 election. So they wasted 2011 talking about debt issues. So that's not much, that's not central to the way Democrats are talking about the economy these days, and that's good. But what they need to do is replace it with a robust program and narrative along the lines that I've been talking about, because it's a proven winner with these kinds of voters. And if you can get them on your side and then have enough strength in government to produce some changes that benefit these voters, then you have a sort of a virtuous cycle of support and being able to do things for voters, and then they give you more support. So obviously we'll win every election, but that's the kind of feed, that's the kind of circle you want to be in, not a vicious circle where you don't have enough strength when you're in government to really do anything that affects their lives, and because of that, they get more cynical, and you get even fewer of their votes, and so on. So you need to change the dynamic, and how long it will actually take to accomplish these things, how soon we could get there, I don't know. That's why they hold the elections, and it's always difficult to make predictions, especially about the future. But, I mean, I think that's the way the Democrats need to go, just looking at the sort of lay of the land.
As an aside, you mentioned, you have a Democratic president, you have a controlled Senate for the Democrats, control the House. Did this administration miss a huge opportunity in 2008? Because they lost it all in 10, right? I mean, they had that opportunity to really push a lot of stuff through. Were they too soft then, you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's a subject of
endless
debate.
Yeah.
It might be a little harsh. I mean, if you look at, there's certainly a reasonable case to be made, and Noam Scheiber's book, The Escape Artist, makes a good case along these lines, that they were a little slow to realize how deep the hole was that the economy was in, and a little bit too willing to buy into the sort of debt and deficit rhetoric problem. And the result of those two things is they didn't push quite as hard as maybe they could have to get a somewhat larger stimulus package, which if they'd gotten it would have been absolutely crucial. On the other hand, if you look at the distribution of votes in the Senate and you look at some of the Democratic senators they had to get support from, it would have been pretty hard. There would have had to be a full court press, and maybe it wouldn't have worked even then. You know what I'm saying? I mean,
sure.
Just because they were, even if they'd been more united on the idea they need a $1.3 trillion stimulus instead of $800 billion, which actually would have made a big difference.
But nobody wanted to use the T word.
They might not have gotten it. Now, the housing issue is a little bit, trickier in the sense that it's a little easier to make the case that they did drop the ball on that, and there are things they could have done that didn't depend on getting stuff through Congress that they just weren't attentive enough to, and the housing market was definitely something that undermined the recovery and its speed and magnitude. So I think those are the big fails, really, on the economy, if they are fails, because if the economy had been better, everything else would have been better. They wouldn't have gotten crushed as badly in 2010. It would have been a more productive administration in general. But lacking that, given, we spent $800 billion and the unemployment rate went up, as that's as far as the voters are concerned, even though, all the estimations showed it actually made a pretty big difference. It would have been worse, but, what people give you credit for is the change they see from when something started.
Right.
And then what, what I mean? People don't use counterfactuals. They don't do thought experiments. They just see what they see.
Absolutely.
So they saw what they saw, and they were not convinced. And from that, many bad things flowed. Now, there's a whole nother line of analysis that said, well, the Affordable Care Act was the problem. If they had put more effort into the economy and the housing market and less effort into the ACA, then maybe the ACA wouldn't pass, but, they wouldn't have gotten into the pickle they did. But I'm not that sympathetic to that. I mean, I think the ACA was a huge triumph legislatively. It's actually working out pretty well, and obviously it creates problems. It created some political problems for them, but I think in the end it will all be worth it, and I think those political problems are going to be less than people think. And it's not clear they could have done much better than the ACA, unfortunately, again, given this distribution of forces in Congress, including some of their own senators, like, God bless us, Joe Lieberman. So, I mean, It's a long and tangled tale, but the ability of the administration to have pushed harder and achieved much better things than they achieved, I think it's at least open to debate.
Right.
So I can't blame them as much as I guess some people do for not being, sort of more gung-ho and more militant.
Fair enough. We're speaking with Ruy Teixeira, senior fellow at both the Century Foundation and the Center for American Progress. If you were writing the message for Democratic congressional candidates, what would it be?
Well, I think to some extent they're using it in an unfavorable situation. I mean, it would be great if it was more unified, but I think there's a real emphasis on things like raising the minimum wage, on things that basically connect to people's economic concerns, and there's some effort to try to float this narrative about we got to get the economy working for everyone, not just the 1%. So, but I think it does vary by candidate, and I don't think it's clear to the average voter that that is the Democratic message. So I think if they were more united around that message and a program that directly related to it, they'd be somewhat better off. Do I think it would actually enable them to make progress in the House? Probably not. I just think the sort of terrain is too unfavorable. Do I think that it would help them maybe keep the Senate by affecting the national environment? Maybe. And that would be the payoff for them, I think, at this point. Because it's going to be a very tight election anyway. It could clearly go either way. So anything at the margin that'll make your base more excited and sort of poach some of the voters from the other side, I think that's good. Because that at the margin increases your chance of pulling out a few of these races that are a little dicey at this point.
Sure.
And that would be good, on the other hand.
Right.
Even if they lose the Senate, even if they keep the Senate, how much are they going to be able to do, realistically, with the House still in Republican hands, or lose, or it's not clear how much progress they can make. And a Republican Party that either gains 5 seats or 6 seats, how much difference is there going to be in terms of the level of intransigence toward Democratic bills? I don't know. Probably not that much different. I mean, it would be bad, but I don't think it's a disaster. And just like I don't think it would be a huge triumph if they held the Senate because, again, you've got a limited amount they can do. I think 2016 is clearly what people are going to be building toward. The Democrats have an excellent chance of retaining the presidency, I think, if they play their cards right. The economy cooperates a little bit. You have a strong candidate. And if you look at the Senate, you have a really favorable playing field with all these Republicans who will be, sort of defending dicey seats in blue states. So, and it's really just almost the reverse of the dynamic in this election, where the competitive seats are really in red states that the Democrats have to hold on to. So, things could be better, and you have a strong election for the Democrats in 2016, and it raises at least the possibility you can take back the House. You don't lose too many seats in this election.
Pardon the interruption. You mentioned 2016, so I'll throw this to you. Is Hillary Clinton the best choice in 2016 for Democrats to win the white working class vote? And if not, who would be?
I think she'd be a pretty good choice. I mean, it's a little bit hard to tell at this early date who would be better. We don't have that much data on it. But if you look at the appeal of the Clintons to white non-college voters, it's always been pretty good. There's some evidence from some of the early horse race polls that Hillary Clinton does quite a bit better among white non-college voters at this point than some of the other candidates. So she may have the right profile to, particularly if she runs on more of a, if you will, economic populist program. I think she does have the potential to really reduce those margins for the Democrats. Is there some other candidate who would do just as good or better job of getting white working class voters? I don't know, but I certainly think she'd be a strong candidate. And if she breezes through the primaries and has a unified party behind her and the kind of message that will really appeal to these kinds of voters, and we know what that message is, I think she could surprise us.
Okay. Ruy Teixeira, senior fellow at both the Century Foundation and the Center for American Progress, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. Ruy, thank you so much for your time. Very much enjoyed it. Look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Anytime. I like it.
Thanks very much. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press and his guest, Danny Cantor, spokesman for the Democratic Governors Association.
27 days until we go to the polls for the midterm elections. We talked a little bit earlier today about the Senate races. Governor's race is also extremely important. I believe there are 36 of them up. Is that right?
That's right.
Danny Kenner is on top of this on a daily basis for the Democratic Governors Association and joins us in studio this morning. Hi, Danny. Good to see you.
Good to see you, too.
Thank you. So I want to make your job a little easier, okay? You don't have to worry about California. Okay?
Yeah,
I will tell you that as former Democratic chair of California. Jerry Brown's going to win.
He's on a safe road to re-election.
All right, yeah. And let's look overall at some of the others. The big ones we hear about. Florida. Start there.
Well, look, Rick Scott, for his entire career in the private sector and the public, and now in the governorship, has rewarded the special interests and his wealthy friends at the expense of regular people, whether it was overseeing historic fraud at Columbia HCA, or now cutting everything from education, refusing to expand Medicaid, on the list to give tax giveaways to the rich. You know, we have a strong case to make, and Charlie Crist is making that case. And we're 4 weeks from an election, and we're talking about a whole host of states, Florida, Maine, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Kansas, Georgia, all over the map, despite the doom and gloom you hear in Washington about the Senate and the House. Democrats have real opportunities both on the political and the policy front to make real change in the governor's races. So we're really excited about it.
That's why these governor's races, by the way, are so important and too often get neglected, right? Of attention to the U.S. Senate or the presidential or the House races. Governor's races, they control a lot in this country.
Absolutely. And what I'm fond of saying is in 2012, Democrats effectively made the case that Mitt Romney would cut taxes for the rich and pay for it by raising middle-class taxes and cutting education, threatening retirement security, suppressing women's health care rights and voting rights, and on and on. That's happening in 60% of the country. And we have an opportunity in 4 weeks to change that. So we're excited about the map we face. We're excited about our candidates. And I think we're going to have a good night, which can provide Democrats, if the prognosticators are right, a real glimmer of hope and change on what could be a tough night.
And so back to Florida. Charlie Crist, good fighting chance against Rick Scott.
He's got a great chance. I mean, every poll indicates this is a dead heat. He withstood. The question was, Rick Scott was going to spend $40 million of special interest money, $50 million attacking Charlie Crist before he could effectively respond and stay on the air. He did that, and Charlie held his own. So now we are in a tight race. We'll never, match them dollar for dollar, but he has enough to defend himself from the lies and the smears and get out a proactive message about the next 4 years. And he's been very effective in doing so. And I think he's got a great chance to win. Probably will be the next governor of Florida.
One of the other tight races and most hotly contested may be Wisconsin. With Scott Walker and all of his problems up for re-election. Mary Burke, very strong candidate. The First Lady has been in on her behalf.
Twice now.
Yeah, twice, really. Yeah. Tell us about Wisconsin.
Well, look, Mary Burke has Wisconsin is last in the Midwest in job growth. Scott Walker has cut taxes for the wealthy and paid for it by cutting education. We know about his record on women's health care rights.
Not cut taxes for the wealthy.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
cut
right.
taxes for the wealthy and paid for it by cutting education. Yeah. And, we know about his record on workers' rights. He mandated ultrasounds for every woman making the most personal of health care decisions. He's against abortion, even in the cases of rape and incest. All these issues are going to be on the front burner. Obviously, the right wing is going to come in to try to save their golden boy, and we know that, and it's already happening. But Mary Burke is mounting a strong campaign talking about all the things that we know win governor's races. We saw it in Virginia last week. Education, infrastructure, innovation, a long-term plan to grow Wisconsin for the long term, which Scott Walker has no interest or ability to do. He promised to create 250,000 new private sector jobs. He's less than halfway there because those policies just don't work. And I think folks get that, and they're looking for a real change, and Mary Burke's offering that. So it's a tight race. It's obviously a super divided state, which Scott Walker will tell you. He says, I can't get higher than 51% of the vote because the state is so divided. He doesn't finish the sentence and say the state is so divided because of me.
Right.
But I think
it wasn't so divided before him.
No, it wasn't. So now Mary Burke is offering kind of a bipartisan approach to create jobs and strengthen the middle class, and I think that's why she's running so strong in that state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And such a key state. And Scott Walker also now has this ongoing investigation, which he keeps trying to squash, and then the courts say, no, it's a legitimate issue.
Yeah, look, he loves to say it's over. He's very fond of saying this is behind us, but it's not. There's a new court development every day. New documents are released, and those are legitimate questions that he's going to have to answer. I expect that instead of trying to answer them, he's just going to attack Mary Burke over the next 4 weeks, and that's fine. We expect that, but his record is clear he made a core promise in his 2010 campaign that he said he wanted to be held accountable for, 250,000 new jobs. He failed by his own standard. So, and we know why, because those policies just don't work.
Right. Very important race to all of our good friends out at 92.1 The Mic in Madison, Wisconsin. Of course, just bouncing around here. One of our favorites, because he's a neighbor of ours and has been in studio a few times. He lives right around the corner here when he's in Washington. I shouldn't say he lives there. He's not like Pat Roberts, hasn't moved here. But Mike Michaud, Democratic candidate for governor in Maine, boards right around the corner here when he's in town for his congressional work. How's Maine looking?
Maine's looking great. I mean, I think the people of Maine have been humiliated and embarrassed by Paul LePage for the last 4 years.
Amen.
He's compared the federal government to Nazi Germany. He's, told the NAACP to kiss his butt. I mean, on and on and on. And it's preventing Maine from moving forward. So they're last in New England in job growth, 47th in the nation in unemployment. It's because he can't bring people together. He's just too divisive, angry, and hostile to get it done. Mike has a long record of bringing people together on issues that matter to the middle class: education, minimum wage, veterans health care, on and on and on. And, Maine is looking for a governor that they can be proud of again. There is a third candidate in that race who has no chance to win. But that is what is keeping that race tight. We expect here, as folks really focus on the race, there's about 62% of Mainers who don't want to see Paul LePage reelected, and that base will consolidate around Mike, and he's going to be the next governor.
Yeah, and the message to that third candidate, Elliot Cutler, is get the hell out of the race because you're not going to win. It's not going to happen like it did the last time where you almost, no, it's not going to happen, so just get out. Otherwise, you're just hurting Mike Michaud. Mike is such, as one of our other neighbors said to me the other day, he's such a Mainer. He really is. He fits that state.
I mean, he worked for 30 years in the paper mill that his father and grandfather worked in. I mean, and he's exactly the kind of person you want in public service. He's
a blue-collar Democrat, is just a really good guy, and there for the middle class, because that's where he comes from.
Exactly right.
Yeah. So now, if Paul LePage is not the most hated governor in America, then it has to be the governor of Pennsylvania, right?
Yeah, well, look, Governor Corbett never recovered from cutting $1.1 billion from education in his first year. He's refused to ask the oil and gas companies who are making a killing in Pennsylvania to pay. They're the only state in the country without an extraction tax. Tom Wolf, the Democratic nominee there, the next governor of Pennsylvania, is asking for a very moderate, reasonable 5% tax to help restore the Corbett education cuts and actually invest in a strong future for the middle class. And voters are obviously responding to that message. And Tom Corbett has not been able to dig himself out of what is fundamentally an awful governing record. And so often in these campaigns, you see things turn on a gaffe here, a political tactic there. The truth is, voters are responding to Tom Corbett's record. They've made a decision on how he governed in these 4 years, and they're looking for a fresh start. And there's no question that Tom Wolf's going to be the next governor.
This is his first term, too.
This is his first term. He will be the first. He will be the first governor of Pennsylvania not to be reelected.
Whoa!
Yeah,
man,
it's got to be pretty bad, right?
Yeah. What a record!
And Pennsylvania. I mean, we think of Philadelphia as kind of a Democratic stronghold, but I mean, the entire state. Is not. There are some conservative parts of Pennsylvania.
I mean, Tom Corbett won by double digits in 2010. It was a tough year for Democrats, but Pennsylvania, he cruised to election on the strength of this conservative, balanced record as an attorney general. But he's failed as governor, and people know it.
In terms of direction, in terms of public policy, nothing more important than these governor's races right here in 2014, the midterm elections.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Robert Hormats, Ruy Teixeira, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who
who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate.